So this is the final question in the SuperPower Relations exam. It's the 12-mark question, and really you should be spending about 15 minutes on this question. It's quite easy to get bogged down, I think, in this question because you think that it's the longest one, so you should be writing an essay, but actually you shouldn't be. It's just about making 3 points and explaining yourself. So no more than 15 minutes on this question. Now, it can be asked in a variety of ways, and sometimes that trips students up. So the first variation that you can get is a question like this, where it asks you to explain why relations between the USA and the USSR worsened, and it gives you a time frame. So for example, here we've got 1949 to 1955. The other variation that you can get is where you're asked to explain why there was an uprising in Hungary in 1956 in this instance, or to explain why something else happened. And finally, you've got this question, which is explain why Berlin was a Cold War flashpoint in the years 1957 to 63. And that word flashpoint is something that we see quite a lot in the questions. Now, if I asked you what all of these questions have in common, and I'll give you a second to think about that, it's actually that they're all asking you to explain. And to get top marks in this question, what you need to do is explain 3 things, and if you can, try to link those, and then if you can, try to say which was the most important in causing something. Then you can get 12 out of 12. Now I just want to, at this point, quickly show you the mark scheme. So if you're just making simple statements and you're not really explaining anything, then you will probably be somewhere in this bracket, and that's quite rare. We don't usually see that. If you are able to explain one thing that happened, then you can get 4 to 5 marks. If you can explain 2 things that happened, you can potentially get 7 marks. And if you can explain 3 things that happened, you can get up to 9 marks. Now you will see that to push it into level 3 and to start heading towards that 12 out of 12, it's about linking and prioritising. And if you do one or the other, if you're able to show links, but you don't prioritise, then you may get 10 or 11. But if you're able to link and prioritise, then you can get 12 out of 12. And that is a bit tough, especially in 15 minutes. It's not a lot of time, but hopefully by the time you've watched this video, you'll feel a bit more confident in being able to do that. Okay, so if we go back to look at our 3 questions, the first question that I'm going to demonstrate is this one here. It's the change over time question, and you can see here that the question that we've been given relates to the years 1949 to 1955. Now, my first piece of advice is that you should try to give some breadth across the period that you are given. Now, by that I mean, don't choose events that all happened in 1949, or don't choose events that happened in 53 to 55. Try to give them something that happened in 49, try to give them something that happened in 55, and also try to give them something in between, because by doing that you're showing the examiner that you've got a real breadth of knowledge across that particular period. The other thing that you've got to be quite careful of is that you make sure that the events you're including in your answer actually fall within this time span. Now, that's because, if you have a paragraph and it's absolutely beautifully written and it's really explaining how one event affected the relations between the 2 superpowers, if it's from 1948, then you won't get any marks from it. And similarly, if it's from 1956, you won't get any marks. So do be careful with that. Now, for the purposes of this question, I'm going to be talking about the end of the Berlin blockade, which was in 1955. 1949. We can't actually talk really much about the causes of, well, we can't talk about the causes of the blockade. We can't really talk much about the blockade itself because it finishes in January 1949 and a lot of it actually happens in 48. Thinking about the breadth that we're trying to give, well, we know that the formation of the Warsaw Pact happened in 1955, so we can possibly talk about that. And then thinking about what we could put in between, well, we know that the arms race, the continuing arms race, was going on at this time. So my initial planning is telling me that these are probably the 3 events that I should talk about. Now, just quickly bringing your attention back to the mark scheme, if we are able to develop those 3 points and really explain the impact that they had on the relationship, then that may well be getting us up to the top of level 2, which would be 9 out of 12. But we know that we need to show links and we need to prioritise if possible. So it helps actually if straight away you think, well, what was the most significant event here? What had the most dramatic impact? And you know, you can have your own opinion, that's the nice thing about history, as long as in your answer you're providing the evidence to support that. For this demonstration, I'm going to choose the arms race as being the most important factor that caused the relationship to worsen. Okay, now although I said that this wasn't an essay question, it is nice to have an opening statement where you set the scene, show that you are focused to the question and you state your opinion. So now, in order to help your thinking, it's quite nice usually in your opening statement to think about what the relationship was like in 49 and then what it was like by 55. So I might say something like, in 1949, the USA and the USSR were just emerging from the Berlin blockade, which had seen both sides almost come to physical blows. By 1955, things had become much more serious. Both sides had developed powerful hydrogen bombs and were also now aligning themselves into alliances, most definitely preparing for war. Now I'm going to state my opinion quite early on, so I'm going to say that in my opinion the arms race was the most significant factor for the worsening relations between the USA and the USSR. And that would be my opening statement, and what I'm just going to do there is highlight that into that red, and throughout the rest of the answer I'll use colour coding to show you where I'm doing particular things that are moving my answer up the mark scheme. Okay, so let's move on to our first point. Now remember, this question is all about explaining. You've seen this before. What we're looking to do is make a point, give some evidence, but then really explain how that event affected the relations between the USA and the USSR, and if possible we're going to try to link between these events that we've chosen. So let's just insert some text and let's make a start. So we might say that the first event to impact on relations were the immediate consequences of the Berlin blockade. I'm going to abbreviate here because it will take up too much room. So that's our point. What we want to do now is give some supporting evidence. So in the immediate aftermath of the blockade, West Germany was officially created as an independent state, and 1 month later the USSR established a second independent state. Now, the majority of marks on this paper are for your explanation, so it's really important that we explain how the formation of these two separate states led to the worsening of the relationship. Okay, so we might say that this definitely had a negative impact on the relationship between the USA and the USSR, because it permanently divided the two sides. By 1949, both sides were beginning to contemplate their next move, and undoubtedly this led to an increased interest and investment into the arms race. Now, if you look there, actually what I've done there is to link to the next event that I'm about to talk about. So you can see I've introduced my answer, I've stated my opinion about what was the most important event to impact on the relationship between the two sides. I've made my first point, my first event, given some evidence, and then explained and then linked. Okay, so if this were the real thing, in the exam I would then go on to talk about the arms race, and I would have a similar paragraph on the arms race to the one I have here, so with some factual evidence and then some explanation as to how it was impacting on the relationship. I would also in that paragraph be explaining why I thought that was the most important, and then I would have a final paragraph on the formation of the Warsaw Pact, and hopefully if you did something similar to that in the exam you would be getting into level 3. You may want to pause the video here because I've got further examples that you can try for yourself, and in the second video I will be explaining how you answer a question that focuses just on a particular event. Good luck.